Good evening everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 16th May 2025 and today we have some very important news topics, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And the first very important topic with which we're going to start this discussion is about a recent Supreme Court's judgment on right to digital access. And Supreme Court in fact made this right to digital access as part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So we all knew that Article 21 of the Indian Constitution is considered as a fundamental right which is evolving in nature, because every time Supreme Court has been expanding the scope of Article 21. Now if you look at the Article 21, so it talks about right to life and personal liberty. However, there are a number of different rights which were become part of Article 21. So that means it has been evolving over a period of time. So as part of this tradition, Supreme Court has recently included the right to digital access as part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So previously in Puttaswamy judgment, the Supreme Court has included right to privacy as part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So in similar way, there are a number of different rights which are included in Article 21. Now first of all, we'll understand the context of this particular article. Now this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this is very important for your general studies paper 2, and it is also important for your prelims examination, right? So for your prelims examination, this is very important. Now what is the context of this particular article? So the context is that we all knew that India has been working on improving the digital infrastructure as part of its flagship program called Digital India. So we all knew that in order to improve the digital infrastructure and increased digitization in India is one of the objectives of the Digital India program that the government of India has launched. Now India has been improving the digital infrastructure, especially for the identity verification. And we can say that identity verification of the beneficiaries is one of the main pillars or crucial pillars of the digital infrastructure of India. For example, know your customer, which is also called as KYC. It has become an essential for accessing the financial and government services. Right? For example, if you are a beneficiary and if you wanted to get the benefits of a particular welfare program, so you must undergo the know your customer. So this is part of the identity verification, and identity verification is being done through the already existing digital infrastructure. Okay, fine. Now what is the problem with this? The problem with this is that what about persons with benchmark disabilities who cannot be able to access the digital infrastructure already put in place? For example, imagine a person who is blind. So how can he access the OTPs which are sent to his mobile phones? Right? So there are a number of things that the persons with disabilities are unable to access the already existing digital infrastructure, and it amounts to the exclusion of persons with the benchmark disabilities, right? Now in this context, the Supreme Court has intervened. And it has also said that it has reinterpreted Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and now right to digital access has become a part of the fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Right? So you just have to remember that right to digital access is now part of fundamental rights under Article 21. So essentially, the state would take adequate and necessary measures to ensure digital access of persons with benchmark disabilities. And since it is a fundamental right, so no one should be excluded by the state. Right, so these are some important implications of Supreme Court's judgment on right to digital access and including it as part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Now here the list of all the fundamental rights have been given. So now we have been discussing about Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 21 of the Indian Constitution talks about what? Right to life and personal liberty. It specifically talks about right to life and personal liberty. And whatever we are talking now, that is the right to digital access. Right to digital access now becomes part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution as per the Supreme Court's recent judgment. However, previously number of Supreme Court judgments have already included other rights, other similar rights as part of Article 21. Now, what are the other rights which are already included in Article 21 by the Supreme Court's judgments? For example, right to live with human dignity is part of Article 21. Right to decent environment, including pollution-free water, air, and protection against hazardous industries, again it is part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And right to livelihood, right to privacy, right to shelter, right to health. No, all these are very important rights for an individual to live a life of dignity. So because of this reason, Supreme Court has understood the importance of all these different rights, and over a period of time through its progressive judgments, Supreme Court started including all these different rights inherently part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Now here Article 21A is missing. So Article 21A talks about what? So it talks about right to education. Article 21A talks about right to education, but all these rights that you can see on this image are now part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, including right to access the digital services. Now I hope you have understood this. Now the legal framework supporting the persons with benchmark disabilities. Now what are the legal framework that are already put in place by the government for persons with benchmark disabilities? Right, so when we talk about the legal framework, we can talk about two different types of legal frameworks which are already provided for the persons with benchmark disabilities. Now one is the constitutional mandate. The constitution itself talked about the persons with benchmark disabilities, and it has also provided for a certain rights for the protection of interests of persons with disabilities. And secondly, there is also a legislation that has been framed by the parliament. And in fact, when we talk about the constitutional mandate, the preamble, the fundamental rights, particularly Article 14, 15 and 21, and even the directive principles of state policy. So all these different features of the Indian Constitution talks about justice, equality and dignity. I hope you knew what exactly is Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 14 of the Indian Constitution talks about right to equality. Article 15 talks about there should be no discrimination against any citizen by the state on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth. Now again, Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, it talks about right to life and personal liberty. It talks about right to life and personal liberty. So therefore, don't you think that all these constitutional provisions are talking about persons with disabilities? And similarly, there are certain directive principles of state policy also. So directive principles of state policy also talks about the persons with benchmark disabilities and their welfare. And even preamble also talks about social justice. Right, so therefore these are some constitutional provisions which are talking about the persons with the disabilities. Secondly, we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. So this act has also been framed by the parliament. So the objective of Rights of Persons with Benchmark Disabilities Act 2016 is to make sure that there should be an adequate legislative or legal protection of rights of persons with disabilities. However, this Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 aligns with the already established United Nations Convention, that is UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There is already a convention at the global level, so that is UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Benchmark Disabilities. So these are two legal frameworks which are already established for protection of rights of persons with benchmark disabilities. I hope it is clear now. Now, why KYC is a barrier for persons with disabilities? Now, why the public interest litigation has been filed in the Supreme Court that the persons with disabilities are not able to access the digital services? Now, why this Know Your Customer or KYC is considered as a barrier for persons with disabilities? So we will try to understand this aspect as well. Now, when we talk about the Know Your Customer norms, so they are now considered as the legal requirement. For example, if you are a beneficiary of a particular government program, and if you want the benefits of that particular government program, you must legally follow the Know Your Customer norms. You should be legally complied with the Know Your Customer norms, right? For example, if you wanted to open a bank account, so you need to go through the Know Your Customer norms. And even a telecom provider is also asking for KYC. An insurance company is also asking for KYC. So therefore, it is actually a legal requirement that is mandatory or necessary for almost every citizen. But in this case, persons with disabilities, it will be very difficult for them to follow these legal norms of Know Your Customer, and that is where the problem has been coming. So in fact, the reason for mandating Know Your Customer for the beneficiaries is to stop fraud and money laundering activities which are actually taking place, bring in more transparency and accountability. So that is the objective of KYC. But here the problem is that the persons with disabilities are not able to access digital services because of certain barriers. What are those barriers? We'll try to understand this. So because of these barriers like KYC, most of the persons with benchmark disabilities are excluded from the government services, government programs, particularly people who are visually impaired and people who are acid attack victims, right? Because as of now, some facial recognition techniques have been introduced, right? So biometrics have been introduced. So imagine how acid attack survivors would go through this, and imagine how a visually impaired individual on his own or her own go through such things. So therefore, it very often leads to the exclusion of persons with disabilities, and that is the main problem here. So apart from that, when we talk about the facial recognition and selfies, for example, there are certain things when you are going through the KYC. So there is a facial recognition and selfies that you need to send. But what about persons who are visually impaired and persons who are acid attack victims? And how can they have the facial recognition and how can they have selfies? And that is the main problem. Now here they are persons with disabilities and they are not able to follow the KYC norms, and this ultimately leads to what? It ultimately leads to exclusion of these people from the government programs. We knew that they are most vulnerable sections. Even though they are most vulnerable sections, they are being excluded from the important government programs which are meant to empower them. So that is the main problem here. So therefore, the visually impaired persons or those who with disfigurement, so they cannot easily align their face for a selfie, or even they cannot have a complete facial verification, and that's where they are being excluded. because there are no alternatives which are available. So it is very important you should put in place certain alternatives, understanding the problems faced by the persons with disabilities. But if you don't have these alternatives, they will certainly be excluded. And apart from that, there are certain visual tests also which are required. For example, blinking, reading on-screen codes, for example, even OTP, and blinking in front of these digital devices or clicking on screen. So they are actually not accessible to the persons with benchmark disabilities, right? So you're getting it, right? So they cannot be able to access all these things. And in fact, no audio or screen reader support is provided to the persons with benchmark disabilities. Now, in fact, it is expected that so when they are not able to access the already existing mechanisms, you need to put in place certain alternatives, right? But there are no such alternatives like audio or screen reader support, which is provided for the persons with disabilities, right? So this also further creating more and more problems for the persons with the benchmark disabilities. And in fact, there is no valid signature alternatives are available for this. So valid signature alternatives are also required, but here there are no such alternatives. And this is also another major problem. So what are the major alternatives? For example, we need to talk about the thumb impressions. And so thumb impressions are often used by the visually impaired individuals, are not accepted. Now you are not accepting the thumb impressions of persons who are visually impaired, right? So this is also another major problem. So all these things have been showing us some structural problems which are existing, and there is also a need to address these structural problems as well. However, in this backdrop, so the information and communication technology accessibility standards were published in 21 and 22. Right? So the information and communication technology accessibility standards were published in 21-22 by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So however, despite such accessibility standards for the persons with the benchmark disabilities, those accessibility standards were not complied by the most of the agencies, and that's where the problem coming in. Now, what is the Supreme Court's ruling in this context? So we'll try to understand the Supreme Court's ruling in this context. So Supreme Court recently a particular case called Rajiv Raturi versus Union of India case 2024. So remember this case, Rajiv Raturi versus Union of India case, and in April 2025 a KYC case. In both of these cases, the Supreme Court has declared that digital accessibility is a constitutional requirement. Since persons with benchmark disabilities are not able to access the digital services, they don't have the access to the digital services, the Supreme Court has clearly said that digital accessibility is a constitutional requirement, and it is not just a policy choice by the government. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also said that the right to digital accessibility is part of the fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And the Supreme Court has anchored this decision under Article 14. Article 14 talks about equality. Article 15 specifically talk about non-discrimination among individuals. Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, and Article 38 of the Directive Principles of State Policy. So that talks about justice and welfare. So the basis of the Supreme Court's judgment on the right to digital accessibility of services is primarily based on or anchored on these constitutional articles. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also reaffirmed the digital exclusion is a form of digital discrimination that violates the dignity and equality. So Supreme Court has clearly said that digital exclusion violates Article 14, right to equality, Article 15, non-discrimination, and Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. So these fundamental rights are clearly violated when you are excluding persons with disabilities and they are not able to access the digital services. And in this very same judgment, the Supreme Court has also directed the institutions like Reserve Bank of India, Securities and Exchange Board of India, and the Department of Telecom. So Supreme Court has directed all these different agencies to revise digital KYC norms and also ensure universal accessibility in all digital services, including people who are having benchmark disabilities, so that it will result in upholding Article 21, particularly right to access digital services by everyone. So I hope it is clear for you. Now, why this judgment is considered as a milestone? So this judgment, like several other judgments where the Supreme Court has been progressively including number of other rights as part of Article 21, so this judgment is also considered as a milestone. Now, why it is considered as a milestone? Because the Supreme Court has recognized the digital exclusion as a violation of the fundamental rights under Article 14, Article 15, and also Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And now the Supreme Court has also recognized the digital platforms as the new gatekeepers to the essential services. However, excluding the persons with benchmark disabilities from them effectively means denying participation in the society. So it is a clear exclusion of persons with the benchmark disabilities. And when we talk about Article 21, as I have already mentioned, that Article 21 is also considered as a living part of Indian Constitution. It is living and it is also evolving over a period of time, because as I have already mentioned, through number of progressive judgments, the Supreme Court has included a number of different rights under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and because of that reason it is said that it is progressive, living and an evolving right. However, previously also in Puttaswamy judgment, the Supreme Court has included right to privacy as part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, and in common cause case, the Supreme Court has included right to die with dignity as part of Article 21 again, and even the right to access COVID vaccines digitally during the pandemic were also included as part of Article 21 by the Supreme Court. So therefore we can say that this is an evolving right. It is a living part of the Indian Constitution, and the Supreme Court has also been progressively interpreting Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. However, the right to digital access continues this progressive trend. So whatever progressive trend that the Supreme Court has already adopted with respect to interpretation of Article 21, it further continues. So it further continues, and right to digital access continues this trend. And in fact, this particular judgment of the Supreme Court, that is right to access digital services or right to digital access as part of Article 21, also set a strong precedent for inclusive digital governance. Inclusive digital governance essentially means that nobody should be excluded, even the persons with benchmark disabilities, and they should also have the adequate right to access digital services and accessible financial technology, education technology and health platforms for everybody, irrespective of their social status, economic status, and even private sector compliance with the accessibility norm of the Supreme Court. Because if private firms or private sector companies are not complied with the norms issued by the Supreme Court, again it comes under the violation of the fundamental rights as well. So I hope you have understood this, right? So this is a very broader concept, so I hope it is clear for you. And next very important topic is about none of the above or nota. Now, why nota be compulsory in all elections? So recently a public interest litigation has been filed in the Supreme Court, and this public interest litigation has been demanding that nota should be part of all elections in India. So this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this is again important for your General Studies paper 2 mains examination as well as prelims examination from polity point of view. Now we'll understand what is nota. So nota is also called as none of the above. So we'll understand nota and what is the importance or significance of nota, and from when nota is implemented, in which elections nota is already part of, and why there is a demand that nota should be compulsorily implemented in all elections. So why that particular demand? So we'll try to understand everything of this nature. So what is the context? The context is that a recent public interest litigation has been filed. A recent public interest litigation has been filed. So it has reignited the debate whether none of the above should be made a compulsory option in all elections, including the elections where only one candidate contest. Right, so only one candidate, if only one candidate contest elections, so there will be no option of nota and he will be unilaterally declared as elected. Right, so if only one candidate contest elections. However, it is now there is a demand that even if only one candidate contest in an election, there should be mandatorily nota option should be introduced. So that is the demand. So here nota is none of the above and it should be made compulsory. So however, this brings into focus the already existing deeper issues about the voter's choice. For example, imagine that I'm an eligible voter and this is the EVM mission. This is the EVM mission and there are number of candidates mentioned here. And finally there is nota option as well. Finally there is a nota option as well along with other candidates. So if I'm a voter and if I don't like any of these candidates, if I don't approve any of these candidates or their political parties, their ideologies, so I would go with nota. So nota means none of the above which are mentioned here. Right, so now it is demanded that nota should be made compulsory in almost all elections, even if in an election only one candidate would contest. So I hope you are getting it. Okay, so this is about the voter choice, right, and the electoral legitimacy, how legitimate an election is, because as a voter I have a choice. So this is also means that right to reject the already existing candidates in a electoral voting machine. So therefore, how legitimate an election is and also the democratic accountability. For example, imagine that in a constituency more number of votes are polled for none of the above option, even though it will not impact the overall election result because we have the first past the post system. So we have first past the post system. So even if a candidate gets a majority of one single vote, then also he will be declared elected under the first past the post system. So for state legislative assembly elections and even general elections, we have this first past the post system. Right, so therefore nota will not have any significant impact on the election result, but nota will convince the political parties, will convince the candidates, will increase the awareness among the voters that the candidates that the political parties are chosen are not the genuine candidates. There is a huge public disaffection on these candidates. So therefore we need to choose wise candidates next time. Right, so wise candidates, so that we would have the better chances of winning elections, because if they can choose wise candidates to stand for the election, so here the political parties, so if they can choose wise candidates in an election, so those who are not satisfied with these candidates, or earlier they were not satisfied with the candidates. Because of that reason, they are casting their vote to nota, none of the above. But now they would cast their vote to any of these candidates, because the political parties have done a lot of things to choose most genuine candidates. They could work for the people, they could work for the development of their constituencies, and that is what they demand here. So that is the reason for introduction of nota here. So you can clearly see that this is the EVM machine. So this is the EVM machine, and in the EVM machine, so there are the names of the candidates who are contesting and the symbol of the political party from which they are contesting. So at last you can also see this nota, which is none of the above. And if you're not satisfied with all these different candidates, you can choose nota, right? So that is the concept of nota. So this is more of a symbolic in nature, and you are indicating that all these candidates, I'm not satisfied with all these candidates because they are not genuine, and therefore I am going with none of the above option. So I hope it is clear for you. Now nota is none of the above, and this is an option which is available in the electronic voting machine, and that allows the voter to formally reject all contesting candidates. So they actually reject all contesting candidates. So if you cast your vote to nota, or if you choose nota, you reject all the candidates who are in this ballot unit. And when this nota was introduced, so it was introduced by the Election Commission of India in the year 2013, following a Supreme Court's judgment on a public interest litigation that has been filed by People's Union for Civil Liberties. So People's Union for Civil Liberties filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court to introduce none of the above option in the ballot paper, and then from 2013 onwards, none of the above is part of the ballot paper. And in fact, the Supreme Court in the very same People's Union for Civil Liberties case held that right to vote includes right to not to vote. Right? For example, an individual has the right to vote, he also equally have the right to not to vote. And in fact, voters should be able to express their disapproval. For example, if voter is not satisfied with all these candidates, so he need to express his disapproval through the none of the above options, and that's why that is the intention and objective of the none of the above. And in fact, the nota actually allows a symbolic rejection of the political parties and candidates who are contesting election in a particular constituency. However, nota currently carries no legal consequence, because we follow the system of first past the post system, and because of that reason, nota is currently a symbolic rejection and it carries no legal consequence on the candidates. Now, the candidate with the highest votes still wins, even if nota secures the most votes. Now, I'll tell you one example. The example is that imagine that there are two candidates who are contesting elections, and two candidates plus there is a nota option as well in this ballot paper. Right? So two candidates and nota option as well. Now, in this context, nota has got 50 votes. So there are 100 voters in that particular constituency, and nota has got 100 votes. And now, out of 50 votes, if a candidate gets 26 votes and another candidate gets 24 votes, the candidate who gets 26 votes would be declared elected. Now, don't you think that nota here carries no legal consequence despite getting 50 votes out of 100? Right? So this is just a symbolic rejection. So that is the concept of nota. Now, why there is a demand to make nota a compulsory in all elections? Why there is such a demand that has been coming in, and because of that reason, a public interest litigation has been filed. So there are demands to make none of the above option compulsory in all elections, including those elections which are not contested, including those elections where one candidate would contest the elections. In those elections also, nota should be introduced, and this actually provides an option for the voters to express their disapproval and dissatisfaction on a particular candidate. However, in cases where only one candidate contest the elections, voters are currently left with no real choice because there is no nota option for the constituencies where a candidate, only one single candidate is contesting. And in fact, if such an election proceeds nota option, so if such an election proceeds without a nota option, then in that case voters cannot express their dissatisfaction. There is no way that voters can express their dissatisfaction in case there is no nota option, and that essentially means denying the spirit of the overall electoral choice. And that's why there is an increasing demand to include the nota option in all elections, even in those elections where one single candidate contests elections. However, the proponents actually argue that it maintains the democratic integrity. So this is very important, that so those who are proposing the none of the above option in all elections, they are arguing that it actually maintains the democratic integrity because you are providing a choice for the voters to express the disapproval and dissatisfaction on a particular candidate and the election process. And in fact, it also ensures, if you introduce nota option, it also ensures that elections are more than a procedural formality. So it is not a procedural, it is more than a procedural formality. So it is more than a procedural formality because number of reasons, right? So if nota is getting a good number of votes, so this indicates a kind of disapproval of the candidates, by the political parties. Now the political parties started thinking about the candidates. So because we have given this opportunity to candidates who are not genuine, and because of that reason people rejected them. So what if we give this opportunity to genuine candidates so that people can vote those genuine candidates, right? So it can actually result in a better thinking among the political parties and candidates would also try to be more transparent and accountable to the people as well, right? So they would not make promises which are irrational, unpractical, which cannot be implemented. So all these are the benefits of the nota, right? So despite it is having no legal consequence, despite it is being a symbolic option, right? So even in rare cases, a symbolic participation also matters, right? Because especially in strengthening the culture of accountability, even symbolic participation is also very, very important. However, a public interest litigation seeks mandate nota in all elections, including the single candidate or even the uncontested elections also. Now, what is the stand of the Election Commission on this? So we should also understand the stand of the Election Commission on this as well. So when we talk about the stand of Election Commission of India, so Election Commission of India is essentially opposing the idea of making none of the above option mandatory in every election, right? So Election Commission of India is not in favor of mandating nota in every elections, especially in those uncontested elections. So there are several reasons for that. So what are those reasons? For example, the Election Commission says that uncontested elections are extremely rare in nature. For example, so there were 9 instances in 1952 when the first elections were held after India got independence, and 6 in Lok Sabha elections since 1971. So it is extremely rare, and therefore there is no point introducing nota in every elections. So therefore it should be viewed as more symbolic in nature rather than practical. This is the reason that the Election Commission has given. And making nota mandatory would need amendments of the existing legislation such as Representation of People Act and even the Conduct of Election Rules of 1961. So it is not under the purview of the Election Commission of India because it requires the amendments from the already existing legislations. And in fact, nota is also having the limited impact because it is having no legal consequence and it is more of a symbolic in nature. And nota has not brought any significant change in the voter behavior or the candidate accountability as well. So that's why the Election Commission is not interested to introduce nota for almost every election, but it has to be seen how Supreme Court would respond to the public interest litigation about this. So next important topic is, now we have understood that Operation Sindoor has been conducted by the Indian security forces as a retaliation of Pahalgam terror attack sponsored by Pakistan, right? So Pakistan is known for supporting cross-border terrorism, and in fact, so there were also fears that the conflict between India and Pakistan would even escalate into a nuclear war. So India already have the no first use nuclear policy, but Pakistan don't have such a policy, and Pakistan is also considered as an irresponsible and a rogue state. So therefore, in this context, we'll understand what is India's stance on nuclear arsenal of Pakistan. And in fact, Pakistan, since it is also having the nuclear weapons, Pakistan very often coercing India. This is also called as the nuclear blackmail on India. So in fact, statements from our government also came in recent times that so India will not tolerate the nuclear blackmail of Pakistan as well. So the context, what is the context here? So we'll try to understand the context. Context is that the defense minister expressed strong concerns about Pakistan's repeated nuclear blackmail or threats of using nuclear weapons in response to India's actions. Right, so we are actually having a strong concerns about Pakistan Pakistan regularly threatening India about the nuclear weapons. And in fact, Rajnath Singh also questioned nuclear weapons. So whether the nuclear weapons in Pakistan are safe or not, because Pakistan is known as the rogue and irresponsible state. So therefore, there should be a need for a better monitoring and surveillance of the international community and international agencies on Pakistan and its nuclear weapons, because Pakistan is a rogue and irresponsible state. However, Rajnath Singh also stated that Pakistan's nuclear weapons should be placed under the supervision of International Atomic Energy Agency. So we'll understand what does it mean, and we'll also understand so how these statements are important. Now, in fact, the repeated nuclear threats that are coming from Pakistan, both media and Pakistani leadership, Pakistani army, so all these factors have invoked nuclear weapons as a deterrent. Pakistan has been trying to use nuclear weapons as a deterrent to stop India attacking Pakistan. Right, so whenever India conducts such a military operations, and Pakistan immediately comes with this nuclear weapons card. However, this has been labeled as a leadership, as a nuclear blackmail. So India started calling it as a nuclear blackmail. And in fact, recent signals that are coming from Pakistan after Operation Sindoor, that Pakistani's military immediately convened, it started convening National Command Authority meeting. So this National Command Authority meeting is a body that oversees nuclear arsenal in Pakistan. So it might be convened, but it was stopped. And in fact, India, by questioning the safety of nuclear weapons in Pakistan, so India highlights the global concerns about the proliferation risk of nuclear weapons in Pakistan. And in fact, countering Pakistan's nuclear bluff that we have nuclear weapons, and so this is what is called as the nuclear blackmail. Right, so the bold diplomatic statements coming from India countering nuclear blackmail of Pakistan. So in fact, India attempting to shift the burden of escalation onto Pakistan. And in fact, this is also part of the wider strategic communication from India to discredit Pakistan's nuclear threats, and also to gain or garner international sympathy and isolate Pakistan diplomatically. So previously also India made efforts to diplomatically isolate Pakistan that were already successful, because Pakistan was once in a grey list of Financial Action Task Force for its continuous support to the cross-border terrorism. And in fact, to legitimize India's military responses as it was justified and restrained in the face of provocation. So because of all these reasons that India has asking the international community to increase its monitoring surveillance of nuclear weapons which are in Pakistan, because India felt that Pakistan is a rogue and irresponsible state and nuclear weapons in Pakistan are no longer safe. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.